لو أغزو ثم أقتل ثم أغزو.
On September the 11th, 2001, Al-Qaeda challenged the United States.
Basically, bin Laden said jump, and Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney said how high.
Al-Qaeda's goal? To create a clash.
This crusade is going to take a while.
To unite the world's Muslims.
They want to put this in religious terms. They want to put this in civilizational terms.
To start a war.
Blood everywhere, shattered bodies everywhere.
That doesn't have anything with Islam. Islam is not like that.
This is the story of that war and how the United States very nearly lost it.
We did exactly what they wanted to do.
In 1993, an American historian, Samuel Huntington, came up with a new theory.
Chris, I am flattered and very delighted to be here.
Huntington noted that the United States was living in strange times. Four years earlier, the Berlin Wall had come down, taking the Soviet Union with it. But this posed an intriguing question. With the Soviet Empire gone, the United States had no credible enemies left. Who could possibly confront them? Speculating on the future of warfare, Huntington lit a spark that was to create a conflagration.
What will be the fundamental nature and source of conflict in this new world?
In the future, he suggested, wars would no longer take place between countries or states. Wars would be fought between different cultures. There were two likely candidates.
Huntington wrote of Islam and the West and of this inherent struggle between the tenets of Islam and the modern state system as being the focal point of what he saw was a coming clash.
This centuries-old military interaction between the West and Islam, it seems to me, is unlikely to decline in the future.
Huntington predicted a coming conflict and gave it a name.
Both sides of this divide are coming to see this interaction as a clash of civilizations.
Huntington's thesis had a very mixed reaction, and there were any number of people that saw it as fear-mongering or hate-mongering, that also saw it as a deliberate effort to sort of recreate the Cold War.
To others in the United States, the suggestion of Islam and the West as rivals made perfect sense. Christian nations were generally peaceful, moderate, liberal. Islamic nations were different. For years, the Middle East had been in turmoil. Terrorism, hijacks, revolutions. To these people, Islamic fundamentalism was a growing threat to the West. The fault lines had been there all along.
There were others who seized upon it as being enormously perceptive and prescient and saw that as the defining principle of really power as we approach the 21st century.
To those of this mindset, Huntington was right. A clash of some sort was inevitable. In the Middle East itself, others were coming to the same conclusion, but their reasoning was diametrically opposite. For decades, the United States had been meddling in the Middle East, toppling legitimately elected leaders, supporting Western-friendly puppets, and stealing oil. The crucible of all American injustices was Israel. Jewish children had clean water, facilities, education. Palestinian children had none of this. Every day, children were dying. To these people, The United States talked the talk of democracy and freedom. Its actions were the exact opposite. Eventually, these injustices would have to be addressed. One man in particular was to become a fan of the clash of civilizations thesis.
We started following bin Laden seriously in about 93 and 94 as part of an effort against Sunni extremism. Bin Laden was in Sudan at the time, but his name started coming up in places as far away as Tajikistan and Mindanao.
Osama bin Laden, son of a billionaire Saudi engineer, had gravitated to Afghanistan in the 1980s, where he had fought with the Mujahideen against the Soviet invaders. To the Central Intelligence Agency, the wealthy Saudi was a mystery.
Was bin Laden another Saudi spendthrift throwing his money at anybody who could say the word jihad? Or was he indeed an organizational man who was building something quite unique?
It was no surprise that Huntington's thesis appealed to bin Laden. For nearly a decade, he had been living it.
Bin Laden's actual intellectual foundation for the clash of civilizations notion was probably the writings of his one-time mentor, Abdullah Azzam. Azzam very much painted a picture of Islam under siege.
In Afghanistan, the Mujahideen had rallied the troops under the banner of Islam. That the United States was providing the guns and the money for the fight was ignored. This was a battle of good versus evil, oppressed against oppressor, Islam against infidel.
This was how Azzam and bin Laden framed the entire struggle in Afghanistan, that this godless, secular power was invading and subjugating a Muslim country, and that it was the duty, indeed the responsibility of Muslims throughout the world to come to the aid of their brethren in Afghanistan.
After a decade of brutal fighting, when the Soviet army was finally expelled in 1989, victory was claimed not for the Afghans, but for Islam. For bin Laden, it was a turning point.
Soviet departure from Afghanistan galvanized bin Laden's generation into believing, many of them at least, that Islam could prevail.
I think it's always been al-Qaeda's historical narrative that it was the bravery and dedication of this small group of mujahideen armed with just AK-47s and RPGs and hand grenades that in essence defeated what was, the second superpower of the world.
The notion of a religious war was so effective that when it came to later conflicts, such as Chechnya, it was employed again. Coming to the aid of the oppressed was of little interest to Osama bin Laden. Coming to the aid of oppressed Muslims, however, was obligatory. And oppressed Muslims were in no short supply.
If you see the past again, after the Second World War, what all has been happening in the world. You take Palestine and then you come to Bosnia and Kosovo, Chechnya, Kashmir. All this is Muslim. So everything is happening in the Muslim world.
Everywhere Muslims were being persecuted. The main oppressor, the liberal, infidel West, and at its heart, the United States. Bin Laden had seen off one superpower. Now it was time to take care of the other. It was exactly as Samuel Huntington had predicted.
The dominating source of conflict will be cultural.
This message that we were on the verge of perhaps a more tectonic clash, a more consequential clash, was not something that many people were receptive to. Interestingly, bin Laden was extremely receptive to it.
Clearly, a battle was brewing. The US would pay for its atrocities, for its hypocrisy, for its unbelief. Huntington's thesis had hit its most influential proponent.
Bin Laden jumped on Huntington's argument and used it for its ends. I mean, every skilled propagandist needs a bumper sticker, and that, in essence, was bin Laden's bumper sticker. And better still, that it was provided by an American, by also a very highly respected Harvard professor. It doesn't get much better than that.
Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, they wanted to ignite the clash of civilization. They wanted a clash with the West in particular. So they worked for that clash. They wanted to fight the West.
United States intelligence was unaware of the true threat represented by al-Qaeda. Clearly, something significant was happening, but they couldn't work out what.
Neither the CIA nor the government as a whole were very serious about bin Laden. In the early 90s, they figured if a Saudi was a terrorist, he would be hiring Pakistanis or Bangladeshis to do the job for him.
But bin Laden was deadly serious.
I remember when I met Osama bin Laden, I was walking with him in Tora Bora. I said to him, look, what's your plan for the future? You are going to fight the greatest power in history, not just in our time. So it is a suicidal. He said to me, my strategy is, to bring the America to our area. If I succeed in bringing them to a Muslim grounds, I can fight them and I can defeat them.
So as early as 1997, he publicly began trying to goad us into coming to Afghanistan. If the Americans had any courage at all, they would come here and settle scores with us, as the Soviets did. They wanted to engage us in the Muslim world and then bleed us as the Soviets were bled.
By now, the CIA was beginning to take bin Laden more seriously.
By the middle of '97, we had determined that Al-Qaeda was unlike any other terrorist group that we had ever seen. No state sponsor, no single location around the world. Here we have a guy who is doing what he says he's going to do. And when you see someone who is saying something and then doing it, I think you better pay attention.
But the US administration wouldn't pay attention.
I don't think the government took him all that seriously, at least until he declared war.
Once again, this was not a war of conquest or for material gain. This was about religion. It was a war that, in bin Laden's mind, the United States had already launched against Muslims.
Bin Laden says, look, this is a war in essence against Islam. This is a war that's designed to seize Muslims' most precious natural resources, its oil. And for that reason, the United States and the West is going to invade Muslim countries and take them over.
Bin Laden's message was specifically designed to resonate with Arab concerns and hopes for the future.
The Arabs were looking for a hero in a way or another, somebody who can challenge those mighty Americans who are humiliating them.
I think probably all world cultures have a Robin Hood kind of story. Bin Laden is very much that kind of a figure. He abandons an easy, ultimately luxurious lifestyle to fight with mujahideen, is enormously brave personally, and in many ways is the stuff from which Islamic heroes are made.
Many people saw that declaration, saw the pictures as a new beginning, a defiant beginning to fight the Americans and to say at least, enough is enough. They, represented a little David who are trying to challenge the mighty Goliath.
Here you had one man and in essence a small group of followers attempting to stand up against the course of history, or to stand up and attempt to change the course of history, to confront the world's remaining superpower in essence head on. So bin Laden and Al-Qaeda had the wherewithal and had the ability to make good on the threats.
And they did have the wherewithal to make good on the threats. On August the 7th, 1998, Al-Qaeda struck US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing hundreds and wounding thousands.
The attacks was actually the launching of the new Al-Qaeda, the new transformed Al-Qaeda. They would like to say to the international community, to the American in particular, here we are.
Surely this might be enough to goad the United States into war?
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan. Our target was terror.
75 cruise missiles were launched. Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan were destroyed. Bin Laden survived.
But at the end of the day, it didn't do anything to solve the problem. If anything, it made us look impotent, and from the Mujahideen's point of view, it made us look like cowards.
The force that was used wasn't consequential enough to destroy the organization. So, like all terrorist groups, in essence, if they push and the response is not firm and hard enough, they will just keep pushing.
Al-Qaeda did keep pushing.
We now have 6 confirmed dead. We have 11 who are still missing and 33 who are wounded.
If the Americans were too spineless to come and fight him, bin Laden would have to make them come, attacking them with such severity that they would be forced to act.
Right hand and repeat after me. I, George Walker Bush, do...
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear...
that I will faithfully
New millennium,
execute the office of
new
President
president.
of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Same lack of attention to Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda was not the Bush administration's priority. After the briefings, after the transition briefings, I didn't even hear the phrase Al-Qaeda in any deliberations at all.
That was to change. Bin Laden would speak again. This time, the United States would listen.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. I have a message for our military. Be ready. We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
At last, the United States was seeing things the way bin Laden saw them.
Basically, bin Laden said jump, and Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney said how high.
The United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps in Afghanistan. We are supported by the collective will of the world.
We did exactly what they wanted to do by going to Afghanistan.
Every invader in history had come unstuck in Afghanistan. Most recently, the Soviet Union. Humiliated and broken by many of the same people the United States was now hunting.
I am fully aware of the difficulties the Russians had in Afghanistan. That's why I have explained to the American people that the new war on terror is going to be a different war.
It was a different war. In just 4 weeks, a handful of US forces took a country the Soviet Union had failed to control for a decade.
And things are just looking great for the Afghan people, what could have been a very bloody war.
But there was a cost to be paid for the low number of troops on the ground.
We still haven't killed or captured Osama bin Laden and his terrorist cadre. Do you happen to know where he is?
Obviously, the United States of America does not know where he is. We do not know if he's dead or alive.
There's all kinds of reports and all kinds of speculation, but one thing we know, we're on the hunt, and he knows that we're on the hunt. And I like our position better than his.
In the spring of 2002, US intelligence received a tip. Senior Taliban officials were back in central Afghanistan recruiting insurgents. Troops and helicopters watching the area were shot at. Clearly, something was going on. The heart of this activity? Deir Awood in Oruzgan province. Deir Awood's villagers were unaware of the US interest. They had other things on their minds. They were planning a wedding.
دوستی خودت مرتضی گد افغانستان خلک مرتضی من میرس چه دوستی و خوشحالی ده برای خونو 4-5 ورځې برای ده معنا څوک مبارکۍ ته راځي لکه دا اوس مثال موږ ته دا خبره وکړه خدای ډېرې ورځې کېږي.
A wedding party was planned for the night of June the 30th. The very same night, US Special Forces decided to move into the village to capture Taliban suspects.
نو کوچنیانو خپل ساتیاری جوړ کړی موږ دلته خپل ساتیاری جوړ کړی ناسو سره داسې ګپه مو کوله سره
کوچنیان هلته معنا درې و لارې و خپل په ساعت اخته و دلته معنا ځوانانو په بانډار اخته و معنا شوق شروع موږ ته چې شوق جوړ کړو تاسو ته خپله معلومېږي چې معنا شوق داسې شوق جوړو یا جوپانه یا بانډار یا یو ټی په پیتا.
Exactly what happened next remains classified. Partygoers, however, recall it all too well.
څه چې ورته وایه چې درابوسو زره وغورځېدل په دغه ناسو زما په فکر کې داسې وسلې چې یو دښمن رالی یو ارغلې وکړي ګرنیټ منیټ ما چې مخ پر سړی راکت وکړي هغې دلته وغورځاوه اخر چې ما داسې وکتل د هغې څه مې لمبېل دوه بیا ټک نه ناوې.
It was no ordinary plane. It was an AC-130 gunship, capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute and pulverizing everything beneath it. And that's exactly what it did.
هر یو ښځې ته چې وګورې چې دا خپل په وینو کې لغړي بې ستره پرته یې وروره یا مؤمن یو کوچنی هلک و لکه په تبر چې پر سر باندې وه دا نیم سر یې یوې خواته و نیم سر یې بلې خواته و.
داسې حالت یې واوښتی پر بل خیال شو چې دا واقعه ولیدله هر سړي چې دا کوچنیان ماشومان توتان غوښې د توتان په سرو کې پرتې دي.
We understand that there were some civilian casualties during the operation. We do not yet know how many casualties or how they occurred.
What we're focused on right now in Afghanistan with this incident is finding out what happened.
No Taliban leaders were killed.
It is termed an accident for precisely the reason that we struck people we didn't intend to.
No Al-Qaeda members were captured.
As far as I know, there was no wedding party.
US forces killed scores of the people they had come to Afghanistan to liberate.
پر اتیا که اوس به نړۍ ژړله معنا زموږ ته د خدای بنده دغه راولاکه ویلي چې څنګه د اتیا چرګانو کې انسانان.
There cannot be the use of that kind of firepower and not have mistakes.
او څه د امریکایانو پر برابر خبره چې ده د امریکایانو دوستي هېڅکله نه سړی کولی شي نه کېږي.
It's going to happen. It always has, and I'm afraid it always will.
It was not the first mistake the United States would make in its war on terror, and it was not to be the last.